Shem. Hold on one second. Just one second. Okay, so this week's portion is Parshas Tetzei. Tetzei Lamilchama Oivecha. It's a lot of laws about war in it. And today is a day, very emotional day. Many of us remember very vividly September 11th, 2001. I was in New York City at the time, in the Bronx, in Riverdale. I remember the sirens going down Henry Hudson Parkway. I'll never forget it. I remember going to Ground Zero on September 12th, just walking around and embracing the firefighters and the police and the first responders and very, very powerful day. So we study in their memory today. We study in memory of all those who are killed on September 11th, and a day that definitely changed our country. So this Torah portion, it has 74 commandments in it. So many commandments, and basically what I like to do is just go through the commandments and try and explain them with the texts of the Talmud, and we'll go through as many as we can. And a lot of them are very confusing, so we'll just try and do the best we can with these commandments. And if you have questions, you'll interrupt us and you'll ask your questions. So the first commandment of the portion is Parshas Tetzei, Lamilchama Oivecha. When you go out to battle against your enemy, and God, and you take a captive. And this is the law of what's called the Yafas Torah, Eishes Yafas Torah. What is that? That is, if you see a woman in battle, and even though she's amongst the 7 nations, and you're not allowed to marry her, and even though she herself may be married, you're allowed to take her in captivity. This is a difficult law to understand, and obviously, so Rashi right away tells us that this is not an ideal situation. This is not a law that we're necessarily proud of, even though the Torah is telling us that we're allowed to do it. Rashi says, "Lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara." The Torah is only speaking to the evil inclination, meaning to say the Torah recognizes that if Rashi writes, "Shem ena kodesh baruch hu matira," if God does not allow us to do this, then you would marry her in a prohibited manner. But if you married her in the end, you'll hate her. And so therefore, then you'll have a rebellious child. And so therefore, the Torah recognizes that if we don't do this, we'll do it in a prohibited manner. But even if we do this in the permitted manner, the Rashi's telling us, he's warning us that if you go down this path, it's going to end very poorly, and it's going to end with a rebellious child. And so therefore, this is the first law. This is the law of the Yafas Torah, that if a soldier goes out into battle and he sees a woman, and even if she's a married woman amongst the Canaanites, he's allowed to take her, but he has to do it in a very specific manner. So first of all, what are we talking about? We're talking about here, the Gemara says we're talking about, and Rashi says also, we're talking about a discretionary war, because if this would be an obligatory war, you would have to kill her. So it's a discretionary war. And who are we saying? Who are you taking as captive? You're taking a Canaanite, even a Canaanite outside the land of Israel. Such a Canaanite was allowed, if they did teshuvah, if they repented, you're allowed to accept them. So this is obviously very difficult to us to understand, but this is a law that the Torah says with respect to battle, and the Torah recognizes that sometimes we have to speak to the inclination. The Gemara in Kedushin says like this: Yafas Torah, this woman who is a captured woman, who dibra Torah el keneged yetzer hara. The Torah speaks corresponding to the evil inclination. Mutav sheyochu Yisrael basar to musos shchutos va'al yachlu basar to musos nevelos. It's better to eat this meat which is slaughtered, rather than to eat the meat, which is just a carcass. Meaning to say that we that she's going to be, even though Tosfos says, what kind of person are we talking about here? Has this woman converted to Judaism or not? So Tosfos says that she's already converted, so she is actually permitted to be married. So why is she called Basar to Musos? Because she was converted against her will. And so this is obviously a very complicated idea. We have this woman who's converted against her will, who we're allowing to marry, because otherwise it would be even worse. And this is a recognition that the Torah is practical. So this is the law of the Yifas Torah. What's a discretionary war versus obligatory war? Basic to obligatory wars are wars, either to conquer the land of Israel in the time of Joshua, or a war that was done in self-defense. But this is a war just to expound the boundaries, and so that's called the Eishes Yifas Torah, and this is something that is obviously a difficult idea. So what do you have to do with her? You have to take her into your home, and you have to cut her hair and either let her nails grow really long, that's what Rashi says, or else cut off her nails, make them really short. So this is a dispute in the Gemara in Yevamos Mem Chesem and Aleph, that there's two opinions. What are you supposed to do with her nails? Both of them have the approach, we want to make her look disgusting, so the man doesn't desire as much. But Rabbi Eliezer says takutz, meaning to say cut off the hairs. Cut off the nails so to make it look disgusting. And Rabbi Kiva says let the nails grow long. But either way, the purpose of both of them is to make it look disgusting, so you don't desire her. And then you remove her, and you remove the clothes of captivity, meaning to say she had beautiful clothes. You dress her in rags. And then she stays there and cries for her father and her mother for a month. And what's the reason why she cries for her father a month? You want to make her, the commentaries say, you want to make her look repulsive to you, so that the Torah is trying to say, okay, you can marry her, but we're going to try and make a way that she becomes less attractive to the man, so that the marriage doesn't happen, because we recognize that this is not the desired state. But Rashi himself already said that if in the end you end up marrying her, what's going to happen is the next commandment, which is chapter 21, verse 15. If a man has two wives, one whom he loves and one whom he hates, then you cannot favor the son whom you love. Meaning to say as follows: the biblical law of inheritance requires that the firstborn son gets a double portion. He gets a double portion of the inheritance. So even if the firstborn son is going to be the son of this woman who you end up hating because she was a foreigner, or you took her in a moment of passion, her son is going to get the double portion over the son of the woman you love. And this is what the Torah is telling us: you can't disinherit this child. Of course, today we have ways around this. If you don't want to give you want to give your inheritance equally, you don't want to divide it up amongst in the biblical manner, which is the firstborn son gets a double portion. The biblical law is that the daughters don't get an inheritance. Today we have a way around it, and we shouldn't just look at it as a way around it. Already in the time of the Talmud, the rabbis understood that it's not the way of the world to divide up exactly like the Torah says. So the rabbis in the Talmud understood that even though the girls don't inherit, off the top of the estate, the girl, even before the sons inherit, the girls were given a certain amount of money in order to make sure that they got married effectively and that they had a dowry. So they would always get, let's say, 10% of the estate for each girl for their marriage. And so if there would be 10 girls, there might be nothing left for the son. This is called the law of the Isur Nechasim, that's mentioned in the Talmud. But there are other ways that you could divide up your estate in accordance with Jewish law, because even though biblically speaking, the oldest son gets a double portion and daughters don't get anything. If you want to do it differently, you're allowed to do it, which is what's called that you basically do what's called a derech chiyuv v'hodah. This is halachic will. and you make an obligation and an admission, meaning to say, you say, I owe this person this amount of money, I owe my children this money, and it takes place one moment before I die. And so that way, if you do that, you're able to give away the money, so it's not being inherited. And so this is something that's called the derech v'odah, and this is something that if a person wants to give away their money to their children in accordance with Jewish law, then you should do it that way. It's called halachic will. Okay, so this is the law of that everybody has to inherit fairly, according to the Torah's tradition. And now we come to the mitzvah of the next mitzvah in the portion is the mitzvah of the rebellious child. First thing we need to understand about the rebellious child is the Mishnah, the Talmud says that there was never such a rebellious child in the world. But that everybody quotes that passage. But there's another passage that says that Rabbi Yonatan says, "What are you talking about? I sat on the grave of the Ben Soror Mora. I sat on the grave of such a rebellious child. What are we supposed to do with this Ben Soror Mora?" It says the Gemara in Sanhedrin says this rebellious child. First of all, what did they do wrong? So Rashi already tells us what they did wrong. That they stole a certain amount of meat and a certain amount of wine, and they had to do it at a certain age, and then they did this action. So under those circumstances, they're going to be executed. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin says there never was and there never will be. So what's the source for the idea? Because it says they come to the child, they come to the court, the parents come to the court and they say this child is einenu shomea b'kol aviv b'kol imo. He's not listening to the voice of his father and his mother. And the Gemara says that the sound of the voice of the mother and the father have to be exactly the same. If they're not exactly the same, then we can't execute this child for being a rebellious child. It's a very deep idea there, meaning to say, on a spiritual level, we could say if the parents are not speaking to the child with a unified vision, with a unified voice, then we could assume that the child is it's extenuating circumstances, getting mixed messages from his parents, and that's perhaps why he went down this rebellious path. So then the Gemara brings in Sanhedrin 71 the position of Rabbi Yonasan, who says, I saw such a rebellious child and I sat on his grave. So how could this be? You're not allowed to sit on somebody's grave, and he was a Kohen. So Rabbeinu Bachai explains that it was Rabbi Yochanan, and so anyway. But the point is that there are some who say there was such a rebellious child, and he sat on his grave, and this is the idea that it's here for a reason. It's not just to expound upon that sometimes it's so tragic, but sometimes the parents have lost already. By the time the child is old enough to be a teenager, sometimes in extremely, extremely rare circumstances, we say it's over, which is heartbreaking, but it's the reality in certain cases. So is a fundamental question. So what's the point of it? So why does the Torah write it if there never was and never will be? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Drosh v'kabel schar. It's to expound it and to receive reward for expounding it. I mean, it's a little bit of a question. Are there not enough things in the world to study that we have to make up more things just to study to receive a reward? So the idea is that we're supposed to study it in order to prevent it from ever happening. That the laws of the Ben Soror Mora teach us certain fundamental ideas about chinuch. I mentioned one of them about education. I mentioned one of them that it's very important that the father and the mother be on the same page, that they educate the child with a unified voice, a unified vision. And so that's the idea here. The idea here is that we're supposed to study these laws in order to prevent there ever being such a child. So this is the laws of the Ben Sorer Umura, the one who is the rebellious child. And now we go on to the next mitzvah in the Torah. And this is the idea of, actually we find here the idea of burial. It says in chapter 21, verse 22, if there's a person who has sinned, mishpat maves v'humas, and he's put to death, the taliso so al eitz, and you hang him on a tree, Most salindiv was all eight. Do not hang him too long. Ki tavor tikparenu bayom ahu. Ki kilas al kim taloi. You have to hang him. You have to bury him on that day because God's. It's a curse of God that he's hanging. Meaning to say, since man is created in the image of God, if you're hanging him up there to die, then it'll be a desecration of God's name. We see from here a few halachos. One halacha we learn from here is that you're supposed to try to bury as quickly as possible. So we see from here that the burial should happen right away. This is the idea. Don't leave the body out overnight. Obviously, in America, it's practically speaking very difficult to do. Usually, people can't pull it off. Certainly, in the non-Hasidic communities. But even if you can't do it the same day, you're supposed to do it as quickly as possible. Also, see from here the idea of burial underground. That you're not supposed to be above ground. You have to take this body off of the ground and bury him under the ground. And the third thing we see, even if a person is punishable with a severe punishment of being executed by the court, nevertheless, we have to treat him with dignity, because at the end of the day, it's not a reflection so much on this person as it's a reflection on God. Rashi gives the example of, what is the example that Rashi gives? Rashi gives the example of Rashi says, Zilzulo Shamelchu, it's a desecration of the king, because man is made in the image of God, and Jewish people are the children of God. It's a parable to two brothers who are twins. They looked like each other, and one of them was a king, and one of them was a robber, and they caught the robber and they hung him. And whoever saw him said, "Oh, the king is being executed." And so therefore, so too in this case, if we see us hanging, that's an indication that it's a punishment of that it's a desecration of God, because we're created in the image of God. So this idea of burial in this passage, we learn from here. The Gemara in Sanhedrin 46b states, says Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Shimon Chai, how do we know that there's a mitzvah to bury somebody from the Torah? This is the idea that you're supposed to be buried, biblically speaking, from the Torah. Today, it's fashionable. A lot of people want to do cremation. I see it a lot. But this is, people should know, and now we could say in a general term, because it's not the moment. That during the moment, it's very hard to say no, but cremation is absolutely prohibited. We see from this passage that burial has to be underground. And the Yerushalmi says it is a positive commandment to bury underground. According to the Avnei Nezer, burial in the earth comes from the idea of you have to return a stolen object, because the person was taken from the earth. So therefore, you have to return it. And also another reason is that in the future, God is going to resurrect the dead, and he will awaken them from the earth. And so therefore, if a person will not be there in the earth, then it won't be able to happen. So there's a difference between America's custom and Israel. In Israel, they bury straight in the ground in a talus, except if you're in the army. The army, they bury you in a coffin. In America, basically speaking, you're buried in a coffin. And this was actually the practice in the past, because it says in the Midrash Rabbah that in the past we used to be buried, even in the ancient world, we would be buried in coffins. And what is the idea of leaving over the dead body overnight? In Jerusalem, it's never left over. You walk into Jerusalem, you'll see burials in the middle of the night, because in Jerusalem, you don't leave a dead body in Jerusalem overnight. And so this is the idea. This is the source for it right over here. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin 47a says on this verse, you're allowed to delay a burial for the honor of the deceased, to bring him the coffin and the shrouds, and then you're not in violation. So is it only for the honor of the dead? What about for the honor of the living? So the Gemara says also for the honor of the living. So basically, if it's for the honor of either the dead or to make sure it's a nicer funeral, then you're allowed to bury the person. Then you're allowed to wait a little bit. Okay. So now we come up to the next law. The next law is lo teret sharachicha oetzeyo midachem v'salam tameim. You're not allowed to see your ox of your brother or his lamb wandering and you hide from them. Hashev tishivim la'achicha. You have to return them to your brother. So this is a mitzvah of returning a lost object. So what is the unusual law about with respect to this? What do we say about this hisalamta? Rashi says, so the Talmud says about this that you should not see them and hide from them. But the Talmud says sometimes you can hide. Sometimes you don't have to return the lost object. What does the Gemara in Brachos 19b say? Sometimes you're allowed to hide and not return the lost object. How would you be able to hide and not return the lost object? Let's say you see the ox, let's say you're a Kohen and you see the ox in a cemetery, or you're an elderly person and you see somebody's, let's say, pajamas or intimate clothing, like, something that you would never touch. You're a scholar and all of a sudden you see this guy drop something on the ground that you would never be walking around the street carrying, like this guy's pajamas. Or you're a big shot hedge fund manager, and all of a sudden you see this guy left his bucket of mulch. You would never do that yourself. You would always hire somebody to do it. So all these cases, you would be allowed to hide under those circumstances. You would be allowed to say v'italamta. Sometimes you're allowed to hide, because. So why do we allow that? Because of normally we say in chachma vein tfuna vein etza neged Hashem, that everybody's equal. But here there's a specific verse saying that sometimes you could hide if it's not according to your honor to engage in this activity. When it comes to returning the lost object, then you're allowed to hide. And so this is the law of, even though you have to return the lost object, you're going to be allowed to hide. Okay, so that's the law of hiding from a lost object, and the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. So the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda is something we discussed at length in the passage of returning lost object. We discussed it at length in Bava Metzia and El Metzios. In the Gemara, it discusses it. So it says, let's say verse 2, if your brother's not close, you don't know whose property it is, or he doesn't know. So you bring it to your house, and it should be with you until your brother seeks it out, and then you should return it to him. So what does this mean? How do you return it? So Gemara says in Bava Metzia, what do you mean he's with you until he seeks it out? You think you're going to give it to him before he seeks it out? It's your responsibility to look at him and to see if he's a trickster or not. How do you determine whether or not he's telling the truth? You ask for siman, you ask for signs, and that's how you're able to determine. This is a siman. If a person wants to say, "Oh, that's my lost object," you have to ask for him to give you a sign, and that's the way you're able to return it. Okay, so these are the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, and it applies across the board. We see it applies to the Torah tells us it applies to donkeys and to garments and any lost object. Okay, so now we have the next mitzvah in the Torah, that this is the mitzvah of if it says in the pasuk, "Lo sir'eh as chamor achicho shoro noflim baderech," that if you you should not see. If you see the donkey of your friend falling off of, you should not see the donkey of your friend or his ox falling on the road. V'salam tamehem, and you hide from them. Hakem takim imo. You have to help him. You have to help him lift it up. Rashi says Hakem takim. This is the mitzvah of te'inai, To help him load up a donkey that fell. So the mitzvah of helping your friend load something up. Meaning to say that, and there's a lot of applications to this. Let's say you see your friend loading up his grocery cart. You see it's too much for him, so you help him out. So this is the idea of helping your friend if you see that they're needing help of loading up something. And this is the mitzvah of te'ina. We also have the mitzvah of prika, of unloading. Now, these are mitzvahs directly from the Torah. Now we have controversial law. This one is not woke, the next law from the Torah, but it's there. So you can decide to ignore it, but I just want to share it. And I mean, I'm not saying you're allowed to decide to ignore it. I'm saying everybody here is an adult and I can't force you to do anything, but I just want to say that this is a law from the Torah and it's not in vogue, but the Torah is the Torah and we follow the Torah. So the Torah says, Al ishav lo yobash gever simlas ish. And lo yakli gever is not allowed to be a garment of a man on a woman. Lo yobash gever, and a man is not allowed to wear the garments of a woman. Why? Because it's a toavat Hashem al kach kol seila. So you're not allowed to wear their garments. Why are you not allowed to wear these garments? So the Rashi says, what's the source, the reason for the prohibition? The reason for the prohibition is because if the woman was dressed like a man, she's going to be able to walk amongst the men. And the purpose of this is for the purposes of being amongst the men, for purpose of licentiousness. And also a man is not allowed to dress like a woman to sit and dwell amongst the woman. Or included in this is he's not allowed to remove certain parts of certain hairs on his body, which typically only a woman would remove. And so therefore, biblically speaking, Rashi says that the Torah only prohibits this type of behavior, which leads to abominable behavior. So a couple of things here, that the Torah itself, the Talmud itself is very strict about this. And certain of these laws no longer really don't apply. Like, for example, that Tosfos in Avodah Zarah says that it's a prohibition to look in a mirror for a man because he's not allowed to dress like a woman. And if he's looking in the mirror, he is therefore basically that's a woman's activity. And also for this matter, he's not allowed to dye his hair. That's also the activity that's typically speaking done by a woman. So these are certain things. I really never met anybody who was strict not to look in a mirror, but that's certainly the strict reading of this Tosos. Let me just stop here for a second, see if anybody has any questions. Any questions about anything we said? And this is the next mitzvah is Ki Karei Kan Sipor Ufanecha Baderach. When you come across a bird's nest on the road, B'chol eitz or on a tree or arts or on the ground, Efrochim or Beitzim, little baby birds or eggs, Va'em Rovetes al Efrochim, the mother's crouching over them. Now how to take the mother while the children are there. First send away the mother, and then you can take the children. So you'll have a long life. So this is the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan. Send away the mother bird. And when you send away the mother bird, you can take the eggs, and then you'll have a long life. So it's obviously a big question. Let's say you're not interested in the baby. Are you still supposed to send away the mother bird? So first of all, the question is, first of all, it has to be, the Gemara says, Pratla Mizuman, that this bird's nest where you send away the mother bird, it can't be on your property. It has to be something that you come across on the road. What about if they make this happen? Let's say they make it in your backyard or on your porch. Do we say that there the mitzvah of Shulach HaKain applies? So that wouldn't work there because it's already in your property. So it's possible what you could do there, someone to say is, when you see that they're building it, you could say, I don't acquire it, and then maybe it could be in your property. but it's a little bit difficult. So therefore, it only applies if Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says the mitzvah only applies if it's in public, in a field or a vineyard or whatever, but not if it's in your backyard. They grow a bird puts down a nest. You can't chase away the mother bird to get the babies and say I'm fulfilling this mitzvah. Of course, it only applies to a kosher animal because how are you going to chase away? How are you going to eat it? And so another idea is the Gemara in Chulin says that you're not supposed to seek out to do this mitzvah. You're not supposed to seek out to do this mitzvah. The Gemara in Chulin says, I might think you should go through the mountains and the hills in order to find it. It says the verse, that it happens to be before you. I mean, if it happens, don't go looking for it. I remember back when I was a student in Yeshiva University, I was studying the laws of Shechita, and we were learning how to slaughter the chickens. And then one time, the rabbi who was teaching us Shechita, he brought in, near Yeshiva University, most people, I don't know if you know the Bronx here, there is a park called Fort Tryon Park. So if you look up the cloisters, it's not as famous as Central Park, little nice, sweet park. And he brought in a little pigeon that he said that they were walking along there and they saw a mother, somebody saw a mother bird sitting on the pigeon's nest, and they chased away the mother, and they got this little baby pigeon, like New York City pigeon, basically a close relative of a rat. I mean, what they eat and stuff. And he had this little pigeon, and he said he was going to shucht it to give it to a woman who was trying to get pregnant. It was considered to be a blessing, and if you eat the bird whose mother was sent away, that you're going to get pregnant. He asked us if any of us wanted to participate in this. I declined. It was not up my alleyway. And then anyway, that rabbi had a big scandal a couple of years later. So I don't know. I don't know that I could ever do that. Like, it's so real. Like, obviously I eat chicken, but to send away the mother just to fulfill this mitzvah it's just too painful and too raw. So I don't know that I could do it. The Chavis says that this is the only time normally a person is supposed to pursue a mitzvah. You're supposed to run after a mitzvah. But here, the Gemara just quoted says that you're not supposed to pursue it. All the other mitzvahs you're supposed to run after. So it shows us that there's something we're very uncomfortable with about this mitzvah. It's something we're very uncomfortable. Okay. Okay. Now we're up to the next mitzvah. I mean, there's so much to talk about all these mitzvahs, but I want to just say that people say you're promised a long life if you do this mitzvah. There's another mitzvah there's two other mitzvahs you're promised a long life. One is honoring your father and mother. Okay, so that's very hard. So people say, okay, I'd rather do this. But there's another mitzvah that you're promised a long life. If you're honest in business, that's at the end of this week's parish. We're probably not going to get to it. It's so there's other ways to get a long life, and you don't have to send away the mother bird. Okay, next, the next mitzvah. Here, let me just read to you the Gemara so just everybody's aware about the long life. This is a Gemara. It appears in the Yerushalmi Chagiga, but also appears in the Bavli. That Pamachas Hayoshe V'Shona V'Bikas Ginosar. One time he was sitting and studying in the valley of Ginosar, and he saw a man went up a palm tree, and he took away the mother from the children, meaning he took away the mother bird, and he went down there peacefully. So he saw a guy totally violate this commandment. Torah says, setting away the mother bird. So a guy was sitting there studying, and he saw a person go up and ignore it, and he went down peacefully. The next day, he saw a different man who went up the palm tree, took the children, sent away the mother first, and he went down from there, and a snake bit him, and he died. So he saw somebody sitting there who completely ignored the Torah, and nothing happened to him. And then he saw somebody who directly followed the Torah, and he was bit by a snake and he died. So he said, but doesn't it say send away the mother and then you could take the children from yourself and you'll have a long life? And what's going on here? So where's the good of this person? Where's his long life? And he didn't know that Rabbi Yaakov had made a drush about it. It says, when will be good for you in the world to come? And when we have a long life in the world to come. So that's the idea. But there is like I said, a segua for finding a spouse, a segua for having children, a segua for being saved from terror attacks now. So there are all sorts of things. And some say, another idea here is there's a whole question. Can you send away the mother bird and take the eggs if you don't really want them? Meaning, say, let's say you don't want to eat the little baby chicks or the little baby eggs. Is it still the right thing to do? So the Chacham Tzvi says it's just optional. Meaning to say, the Sefer Chinuch says if you fulfill this mitzvah, you're going to merit children because it says shalech teshalech es ha'im es ha'banim tikach lecha. Meaning, if you send away the mother, you'll be blessed with children. So, meaning to say, you'll merit. So there's no actual mitzvah to take the little babies, just send away the mother and you go away and you fulfill the mitzvah. And so that's what Chacham Tzvi and the Chasam Sofer recommend. Okay, now to the next mitzvah. This is one of those mitzvahs which even if it wasn't written, we would know we have to do it on our own. What is that? When you build a new house, you have to make a fence around the roof. So you don't have blood. You don't have blood on your hands. So this is the mitzvah of Makkah. The mitzvah of Makkah is that when you build a house, if you have a roof, you have to build a fence around it so that the person doesn't fall. It's common sense. Make a fence to protect. But it's even more than that. It's not just a roof. It's any elevation off of the ground that's significant. You have to. I mean, it can even be a porch if it's 10 tefachim off the ground. You have to have a fence around it so that they don't fall. I remember one time I was invited to somebody's house for a Shalom Zohar, and I was sitting in the backyard, and there I was said to them, you really need a fence here because it was like a little porch and there was no fence. And then I fell off. I fell off myself into the backyard. So the Gemara in Ksuba says that in every generation there is so the Gemara in Ksuba says that there's a story that when a certain rabbi died, the pillar of fire stopped between him and the world. And we have a tradition that there's only one person every generation is able to stop the pillar of fire. And so Rabbi Alexandra came close and he said, make it bring back the pillar of fire before on account of the Chachamim. Nobody listened. He said, do it for your father. Nobody listened. Do it for yourself. Nobody listened. So Rav Ada bar Masna came and he said, what was the reason why it went away? Because he didn't put up a fence on his roof. So we see from here, from the Gemara in Ksuvos, that the lack of putting up a fence on your roof is considered to be one of the most severe sins. So this is also, even though we think it's just a fence, this fence is still treated like holiness, like as though it's a mitzvah. So it's a kedushas mitzvah, and you have to treat this fence that you put up with sanctity. However, it is the case that a non-Jew is allowed to put it up on your behalf. Even though it's a mitzvah, you're allowed to put it up. So it's a positive commandment from the Torah. Okay. It's not only a positive commandment, it's also a negative commandment that if you don't do it, that you're going to be bringing something dangerous into your house. We see from here that there's a general commandment that you're not allowed to put anything dangerous in your house. So, for example, I think Gemara in Ksuba says, How do we know that you're not allowed to have a dangerous dog in your house or a rickety ladder? It's from this commandment, do not put blood into your house. Okay. Okay, the next law that we come up to is the mitzvah of shatnes or kolayim. There are really 5 different prohibitions of kolayim, and here we're going to talk. The first one is talking about the mixture of kolay kerem, of kolayim of your vineyard. You're not allowed to have a mixture. You can't plant a seed in your vineyard, meaning a seed of a grain in your vineyard. That if you do this, it'll become a prohibition. You're not allowed to have benefit from it. So the 5 types of kolayim, you're not allowed to have a mixture of wool and linen. You can't mate 2 different species of animals together. You can't work them together. You can't plant 2 different seeds together, and you can't plant a seed with a vineyard. These are the 5 prohibitions of kolayim. Torah doesn't tell us the reason for the prohibition, so it's generally assumed that the prohibition is what's called a chok. It's a law without explanation. And so now we're up to the second one. You're not allowed to plow a cow, an ox, and a donkey together. Any 2 species. Here we say some perhaps have suggested that maybe the problem is that it's not fair to the donkey, that the ox is working so much quicker and therefore it's painful to the donkey, or maybe it's painful to the ox because it's supposed to be a two animal job, and here he only has 1 animal. And then we have the next prohibition, you're not allowed to wear wool and linen together. That's going to be considered the prohibition of shatnes. So here's a story about this. You're not allowed to plow an ox and a donkey together. So the Gemara tells us one time. The story is that Rabbi Nosson Adler was one time traveling with the Chasam Sofer, and the wagon he was on had 2 oxen pulling it. But then one of the oxen, there had 2 horses on it. And then one of the horses died. And so the wagon driver ran to the village that was closest and brought back a donkey. When Rabbi Nosson Adler saw this, he jumped off the wagon and he began to dance. And he said, I could have lived 10 years in Frankfurt and I never would have merited to fulfill this mitzvah of not traveling in a wagon of a horse and a donkey together. But now I benefited. And of course, I'm going to dance. So he was so happy, this rabbi was so happy that he fulfilled the mitzvah of not going into a wagon that's being led by 2 different species of animals. What about the prohibition of wearing of wool and linen? This prohibition is not just wearing wool and linen, but rather warming your body in any way. So let's say you have a blanket that's made out of wool and linen. That is a problem. That's problematic because it's warming your body. Let's say you have, it's not usually a towel. Let's say you have a towel that you wrap yourself in, and I don't know if they make woolen towels, but let's say you have woolen threads in the towels, wool and linen. That could be a big problem. Let's say you have a tablecloth that's a hand-woven tablecloth. So then what you do sometimes is you wrap it around yourself. Sometimes a tablecloth, that could be a big problem. What about another thing is a rug, a carpet. Sometimes you put your feet in it and the carpet warms up your feet. And sometimes it's a woolen carpet with linen threads. And this will be a big problem. So you have to be careful about this prohibition of shatnes. What if you're in the middle of the street and somebody comes over to you and tells you that you're wearing wool and linen? Do you have to strip down, take off your suit, and now walk around in your undergarments till you get home? So there, the Gemara says we could be lenient because of the mitzvah of kavod habrios at that point of human dignity. But generally speaking, you have to be very careful not to obviously get a suit that has wool and linen together. You should check it, and places that check them. So then you have the mitzvah of tzitzis, but really this mitzvah appears in the Parsha Shalach, so it's repeated here to tell us that the tzitzis, the fringes, can even be made from kolayim. And the next mitzvah is the idea of motzi shemra, of the libel prohibition. So this is if a man marries a woman and then he spreads libel about her, and he spreads lies, and he says, this woman I married, and I discovered she was not a virgin. I found she was not a virgin. He makes up a lie, and so the father proves that she was a virgin. How does he prove it? He proves that he has the sheets from the wedding night and proves she was a virgin. And so now what do we do to such a man after he takes the sheets? So they should take this man, and he has to pay 100 silver coins to the father of the girl because he spread these lies and said she wasn't a virgin. Vilo, and then he has to marry her, and he cannot divorce her his whole life. So there, under these circumstances, if she doesn't want to be married, she's compelled. She can leave, but he's compelled to marry her. At that point, he has to marry her, and that means he has to support her. So this is the idea of the motzi shema, the person who libels the woman, and he is obligated to support her, and if he's discovered to be a liar. But if she had been adulterous while she was betrothed to him, remember there was a formal betrothment ceremony, then she would get the stoning. Then we have the next law is about the man and the woman who are adulterous, and then we have the law of you had a question? Did I cut somebody off? Okay, so then we have the two laws of the onus of the mafata, the seduction and the assault. I don't want to get into that now. And then we get to the next law. You're not allowed to marry your father's wife, that if she was ever married to your father, you're not allowed to marry her. And then there's the law of a person who is Petzuadako, Kroshifcha. This is a person who has severed himself. He's not allowed to come in. And then we have the prohibition of the mamzer. The mamzer cannot come into the community. What's the mamzer? Again, the mamzer is the person who is born from a union, which it would be kares penalty. And so such an offspring of that union is not allowed to come into the community. It's a big question. But one thing to know is that the mamzer, who, even if a mamzer is somebody who's a Torah scholar, he takes precedence even over a Kohen. So even though we have this law, this is only with respect to marriage, but the mamzer can marry another mamzer. Also, a mamzer can marry shifcha. So there are certain ways which we can get around the actual prohibition. The mamzer is obligated in all the commandments of the Torah, but, says the Shach, he's disqualified from writing a Sefer Torah. And Mordechai writes that he shouldn't write a Sefer Torah. Why? Because when he came to this verse that he's not allowed to come into the community of God, it's possible what he'll do is he won't have the proper intention for the name of God. So that's an interesting law about the mamzer. Okay, let me stop here. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to address these questions. We went through these laws very quickly, but I want to make sure we at least touch the surface of it.